You who maybe have not met me, my name is Molly. I manage adult programs at the O'Keeffe Museum, and it really is a pleasure to be able to do this each month with all kinds of folks from all kinds of disciplines. And we are super pleased to be able to kick off July's program with a special talk with Bonnie Steward about O'Keeffe's Chow dogs. But we will jump into that in just a second because I would like to begin by recognizing the lands of the Pueblo people on which the sites of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum stand. We recognize and honor their elders, past and present, and celebrate the vitality of their people today and into future generations. I offer this with humility and gratitude in acknowledgement of the need to confront the ongoing injustices of settler colonialism. I'd also like to extend a thank you to our members and donors who are here with us today because it's from support that you share that make free programs like Mornings with O'Keeffe possible. If you're not yet a member and you enjoy this program, please consider joining and visit gokm.org/membership to learn more. Throughout the talk, please place your questions in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your device. We will try to answer as many as we can at the end of the conversation. Please note that following today's talk, a recording will be made available on the O'Keeffe Museum's website in a week or two once we've had a chance to add captions in English and Spanish to the recording. It's now my pleasure to formally introduce our presenter this morning, Bonnie Steward, who is the librarian here at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum Research Center and Library. And Bonnie joined the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in 2023. And as the librarian, she manages the day-to-day operations and activities of the museum library, including overseeing cataloging and circulation, reference and public services, and collection preservation. She holds a bachelor's degree in studio art from St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, and a master's degree in library and information studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Professionally, Bonnie aspires to dedicate her work to preserving material culture as a foundation for strength and resilience in communities. And today we are so excited to be joined by Bonnie, who's kicking off sort of a month-long celebration of furry friends and the relationship of dogs and pets to Georgia O'Keeffe. So later this month, we're also going to be holding adoption events here at the museum and also in Abiquiu and other really exciting things that sort of fall into that theme. But again, we're getting started today by learning about O'Keeffe herself and how the archival record shows her connection and her relationship with her pets. So Bonnie, thank you so much again for being here with us. We're so excited to hear from you, and I will go ahead and turn things over.
Thank you, Molly. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, you sound great.
Perfect. All right. Well, hello, everyone. I am Bonnie Steward, and I'm the librarian at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. I'm very happy to be here today talking about Georgia O'Keeffe's dogs. For those of you who may not know, O'Keeffe famously owned multiple Chow Chow dogs over the last few decades of her life. In addition to including them in most aspects of her daily life, she was photographed with them, took her own photographs of them, sketched them, and frequently referred to them as best friends. I'm talking today not as a scholar or a writer, but as a librarian. I'm hoping to use the museum's library and archive collections to illustrate a few examples of how we know what we know about Georgia O'Keeffe's relationship with her dogs. I'm almost treating this as a bit of a virtual reference appointment where I've pulled a variety of books, photographs, records, ephemera, etc. from our collections that speak to a particular subject of interest. In the library and archive, we frequently consult with researchers at the start of a project to identify relevant sources in our collection. So in a way, that's what I'll be doing today, providing an overview of our research collections as they relate to O'Keeffe's dogs. This first image is a photograph by Todd Webb, a close friend to O'Keeffe. Shots like this are often favorites of mine because they catch O'Keeffe in a more natural, relaxed state. I'll note now that in our museum's collections, we currently have photographs in both our archive and fine art collections. I know my intent is to highlight library and archive collections today, but you will see a few items, photos in particular, that technically belong to our art collection. That can be important for you to know if you're interested in looking up things that you see here later on. Before we get ahead of ourselves, I think it's important to note that O'Keeffe maintained a lifelong appreciation for animals, possibly originating in her upbringing on a Wisconsin dairy farm. But it's clear from her writings that she enjoyed a variety of animals and was often observing their colors, shapes, and personalities. Of particular note, before the Chows, O'Keeffe kept cats in both New York and New Mexico. During her early summers in New Mexico, O'Keeffe looked after Siamese cats, but was splitting her time between the states. Her close friend and neighbor, Richard Pritzloff, who later gifted her the Chows, appears to have more or less lent her cats for the summer season before taking them back for the winter. Eventually, after she made New Mexico her permanent home, her cats were kept year-round. In spite of the fact that she may have viewed her cats, at least for a period of time, as shared companions rather than her own personal pets, she wrote very fondly of them. She particularly enjoyed when a cat would accompany her on walks and even brought at least one Siamese along on a camping trip to the Black Place, as pictured here in Maria Chabot's photo on the left. Also of note, O'Keeffe wrote to her sister Claudia in November of 1951, right before she got her first chows, that she has a large black French poodle, really very sweet and polite. The photograph on the right by George Danielle identifies this poodle as Poncho. I haven't come across any additional information on Poncho in our archive, and the relationship appears to have been brief. By 1953, O'Keeffe is already writing about the poodle in the past tense. At least one biographer has written that Poncho passed away after being struck by a car, but without reference to a source for that bit of information, I can't confirm it. So, in late 1952, Georgia O'Keeffe received her first two Chow Chow puppies from her close friend Richard Pritzloff and named them Bo and Chia, names she would use again for later dogs. She wrote to several people about the event, both friends and family members. In the first page of the letter to her sister Anita that you see here, she writes, "I have two new Chow puppies, half grown. A friend brought me yesterday. They seem to be very quiet and sweet. Also, it is much to bother with. Maybe I will not keep them." We know, of course, that she did keep them and went on to own several more. And if you're looking closely, you might notice that O'Keeffe actually misdated this letter, I think, to January 1st of 1952 rather than 53. Yes, and writing to thank Richard Pritzloff, she described picking burrs from the dog's fur after walks and noted that Bo in particular was very smart and the most trouble and most pleasure. To her friend Blanche Matthias, she writes also on January 1st of that year that the house now felt full of dogs crowding out the cats. Since O'Keeffe never kept a diary, her letters are a primary source of insight into her daily life and inner world. While her published writings were influenced by her awareness of her public image, her private correspondence offers a more authentic look into her daily routines and relationships, including events concerning her chows. The photograph seen here was taken by Doris Bree, O'Keeffe's agent, business manager, sometimes described as a confidant. It's dated as having been taken sometime after 1952, the year the first dogs arrived. I can't be certain which dog is pictured or if it was O'Keeffe's without additional research, but I included it here for perspective. A Chow Chow puppy is clearly so sweet when so small. I'm going to give a brief overview of the breed here for anyone who's unfamiliar, as I was. The Chow Chow is a medium to large breed, typically weighing between 45 and 70 pounds. It's known for its thick double coat and lion's mane-like ruff around its head and shoulders. It has a round face with deep-set eyes that can result in what the American Kennel Club calls a scowling, snobbish expression. Interestingly, it has a blue-black tongue and comes in 5 recognized coat colors: red, blue, cinnamon, black, and cream. Chow Chows originated in China over 2,000 years ago and are said to have once served as guard dogs and hunters for emperors. Chows are described as loyal, independent, and calm, bonding deeply with family while staying aloof with strangers. They can be fiercely protective and with strong guarding instincts that can approach aggression if not managed properly. The color of each Chow O'Keeffe owned is unconfirmed, but we can piece together some answers through photographs and documentation in the archive. Jingo, the dog pictured on the left, for example, is confirmed in vet and breeder records to be cinnamon. The dog on the right is as yet unidentified, but looks to be black or possibly blue. There are challenges in determining a definitive list of O'Keeffe's Chow Chow dogs. I've read 6, 8, 9, sometimes more. Because they were all the same breed, they can be difficult to tell apart in photographs when they share the same color. And to make matters even more confusing, O'Keeffe often used the same names over again for different dogs. So, for example, we believe there was more than one Bo, more than one Chia, more than one Inca, etc. This photograph on the left is by Dan Budnick, just another demonstration of the variety that exists within the Chow Chow breed. These are both O'Keeffe dogs. Over time, O'Keeffe developed an appreciation and a certain loyalty to Chow Chows. I think this can be common amongst dog or maybe just pet owners in general. I know my growing up family had a series of black schnauzers who we loved very much. No dogs were ever better than our dogs. O'Keeffe seemed to feel similarly and wrote to Pritzloff, who again is the man who introduced her to the breed. She wrote to him from India while on a months-long tour of several Asian countries. All the chows I have seen have had short hair, not as pretty as ours. While breed loyalty can be pretty common, O'Keeffe, at least for a time, took it to another level. She became a member of the Chow Chow Club in 1972. You can see her membership card on the lower right. She was also a subscriber to the Chow Chow Bulletin. You can see several issues here that she originally kept in the book room at her Abiquiu house. The first of O'Keeffe's issues was published in 1972 and the last in 74. In 1973, O'Keeffe traveled to Fort Worth, Texas, accompanied by her agent, Doris Bree, to attend a spring specialty show organized by the Chow Chow Club. On the upper right is the program for that event. Some years after this event, Dr. Samuel Draper and Joan MacDonald Brearley published The Book of the Chow Chow. In it, Dr. Draper relates the story of his meeting O'Keeffe and Bree at the 1973 specialty show, after which they visited a kennel together to look more closely at different chows. During the visit, O'Keeffe is quoted in the book as having commented, "This dog's head is a giant orange chrysanthemum, and this one is a magnificent scarlet pincushion." The copy of the book O'Keeffe had in her library, pictured here, was inscribed by Dr. Draper, "For dear Georgia, who loves Chow Chows perhaps more than anyone." As evidenced by the colorful comments she made on different Chow Chow's ruffs, including one resembling a chrysanthemum, O'Keeffe was inspired by her Chow's shapes and colors. She famously wrote in the book we sometimes refer to as her autobiography about, quote, "the idea of filling a space in a beautiful way, where you have the windows and door in a house, how you address a letter and put on a stamp, what shoes you choose and how you comb your hair." End quote. If she continued on with her list, it's possible the dogs would have been on it. In our museum's archive are the photos O'Keeffe took of her dogs. Rather than being portraits of her pets capturing cute moments, these photographs seem closer to being studies in shape, contrast, light, not dissimilar to interests you see demonstrated in her paintings and other artworks. The exhibition catalog for the show Georgia O'Keeffe Photographer that ran between 2021 and 23, I believe, compiles O'Keeffe's personal photographic works, including the photos she took of her Chow Chow dogs. So it's a great resource if you're interested in learning more about O'Keeffe's approach to photography and as it relates to the Chows. A quick note here that in addition to photographing her dogs, O'Keeffe did sketch them. She almost never painted or drew people or pets, so it's somewhat unusual, but still very much in line with her interest in capturing her dogs' forms. O'Keeffe commented more than once on how nice her chows looked against the snow, specifically their color against a white background. In a letter to her sister Anita, she comments that the chows she's looking at out the window are blue and they have a frosty color against the snow. To her friend Blanche Matthias, she again writes that her new chows astonish and amuse me. They seem to belong to Adobe and a snowy world. This comment seems to confirm the idea that she saw her dogs almost as an extension of her surroundings, elements that fit naturally into the color palette and textures of her New Mexico home. Related in some ways to her writing about filling a space in a beautiful way. I included the archival folder this photograph of a Chow Chow in snow came from for perspective. This particular folder contains photographs that are all protected by Mylar sleeves. They come out of a collection called the Georgia O'Keeffe Papers and were grouped together, possibly by O'Keeffe, and labeled Bobo. She sometimes called her second dog named Bobo. Um, However, a note left behind by a researcher or perhaps an archivist indicates that at least some of these photos are not, in fact, Bobo. O'Keeffe's opinions of her dogs were often different from others meaning Abiquiu locals, her staff, visitors, family, friends. She said at times that she had the dogs for protection, and while I'm sure their presence eased her mind, their guard dog tendencies didn't always make her visitors and neighbors feel comfortable. The photo on the left shows Bobo, or the second Bo, next to a beware of dog sign, which was there for a reason. O'Keeffe originally allowed her dogs to go out in town or wherever else they wanted to go between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., and they behaved, by all accounts, like menaces. O'Keeffe herself relates this story in a letter to her conservator at the time, Carolyn Keck, of a terrible incident with one of her chows and a cat that ended in a fatality. O'Keeffe recounts on multiple occasions with a bit of pride that her first dog, Bo, was the quote, town boss or top dog. Eventually, the dogs were only allowed in the walled garden. Oh, sorry about that. There we are in the garden at Abiquiu and were no longer given free rein of the town, but that didn't seem to stop them from greeting visitors enthusiastically at best and sometimes somewhat aggressively at worst. So signs were needed. The photo on the right is of the roofless room, an open air room in O'Keeffe's Abiquiu house that she noted in an interview was very good to have because you could shut the dogs in there if you wanted to. Evidently, she would put the dogs in that room on occasion, but there are other stories of them being out and about while visitors were at the house, sometimes under the table during meals, making some people, maybe particularly non-dog people, somewhat nervous. In addition to correspondence, as I mentioned earlier, memoirs and oral histories from those close to O'Keeffe often provide invaluable firsthand perspective on things like her character, relationships, daily life. They can capture details that are often absent from more formal records, something that's particularly true for subjects that haven't been written about much, like O'Keeffe's dogs. Pictured here on the left are two published memoirs, or I'm calling them memoirs. One by Todd Webb, a longtime friend to O'Keeffe. This book is taken in part from the journals he kept for most of his life, and it includes a few insightful anecdotes that illustrate his friendship with O'Keeffe, including a Chow Chow story that I'll talk more about later on. Getting to know Georgia O'Keeffe is a memoir that was published just last year and written by Mary Ligon. I hope I'm pronouncing Mary's name correctly. Mary spent over 2 years with O'Keeffe as a night and weekend companion, and she includes a few stories on the Chows, including a few trips to the vet. These are both books that we catalog to our general library collection, meaning that they don't require any special permissions to access them like O'Keeffe's books do. I mention them in particular because they're resources that you might be able to find at home, firsthand accounts that don't require an appointment or a special trip to an archive like ours. And lastly here, I included this picture of Esteban Suazo with Bobo, intending for it to represent the oral histories in our collection. Esteban was O'Keeffe's gardener and a very regular, long-time member of O'Keeffe's staff. It looks as though from this picture that he had been accepted into the Chow Chow's inherently small circle of acceptance. Several descendants of Esteban became integral parts of O'Keeffe's homes, both while she was alive and after. And many of his family members, in addition to numerous other completely separate individuals, have contributed oral histories to our archive, documenting memories of O'Keeffe that occasionally do mention her dogs. O'Keeffe appreciated Chow Chows and valued her particular Chow Chows for a variety of reasons. I mentioned beauty and strength already, but perhaps most importantly, she valued their companionship. I'm going to read a bit here from a letter published in the exhibition catalog for Georgia O'Keeffe Art and Letters. I'm pointing you to a published transcription of this letter because, again, this book is likely a resource that anyone interested could find for themselves. In this particular letter written to her friend Anita Politzer in 1955, O'Keeffe considers the concept of friendship. She writes, "It is a week or more, and I do not write to you. Now you must realize that I am old enough so that people I have called friends have died, but my dogs are here. Bo sleeps at my door every night, and Chia at present sleeps on the bed because she has a cold. When I go out to work, as I do this time of year, Bo goes along and sleeps in the shade of the car after looking about to see if there are any rabbits, antelope, or anything alive of interest. If I go to if I go out to walk, they go along. If I drive, they go, except that I do not take them to town. Friends, maybe the best, and very beautiful too." She goes on to consider whether the man who delivers her wood is a friend, her Texas neighbors across the river, her framer, her doctor. She notes a couple of people who she is confident were her friends, including one cat. But at the very end, she returns to the dogs again. After she's signed off on the letter, she adds, "Maybe the man who gave me the dogs is my friend. He knew their parents and grandparents. He knew they were good." I feel like it's such a great demonstration of the trust she had in her dogs as faithful companions. Out of all the individuals she listed, she's most confident in her dogs, and she very frequently refers to them as friends and best friends in other correspondence as well. So, as her best friends and loyal companions, they were really integrated into so many aspects of O'Keeffe's life. That can be shown in a variety of ways, I'm sure, but sometimes photographs are the most direct. So, I'm going to share a variety of photos, some from the archive, some from the art collection, that demonstrate the Chow's participating alongside O'Keeffe in her life. The first picture was taken by O'Keeffe's sister, Catherine. You can see O'Keeffe working at the kitchen counter. It looks like she's mixing something up, and you can see a dog lying directly behind her, probably just wanting to be close, but definitely making themselves a tripping hazard. O'Keeffe is well known to have had an interest in cooking and eating fresh food, often reading cookbooks at night to help her go to sleep. I'm sure she was glad to have the Chows participating with her. As an aside, but related to the tripping hazard in this photo, O'Keeffe is known to have installed white carpet in her Abiquiu studio so that as her vision worsened, she would still be able to have the dogs with her without fear of tripping over them and hurting them. This Tony Vaccaro photograph shows O'Keeffe in her sitting room listening to music, which was a favorite pastime of hers. She preferred to listen to music as a singular activity, not as something to have on in the background or while she was doing something else. She did not listen to music, for example, while working in her studios. So here she sits listening to madrigals with a dog sitting next to her in a separate chair. And here we have O'Keeffe with a Chow in the Abiquiu garden. As I mentioned, O'Keeffe eventually barred her dogs from wandering the town, so their time in Abiquiu was largely confined to the walled property that included the garden. Although O'Keeffe does write about taking them for walks in the White Place, also called Plaza Blanca, which is not far away. O'Keeffe was very interested in gardening and had strong feelings about what and how to grow things, food in particular, but she also viewed gardening as a major distraction from her work. So she had a bit of a love-hate relationship with it. That's in part why she hired people like Esteban, who the Chows got to know. The dogs also accompanied O'Keeffe on most of her walks about the country. She often references her daily routine in letters to friends and relatives, and any description of her day usually includes at least one dog walk. In a letter from 1958, she writes again to her friend Anita Politzer, "The dog and I have a walk almost every early morning and again at sunset. He just now banged on the door to tell me he was ready to come in and go to bed." These photographs were taken by John Loengard for Life magazine. O'Keeffe was featured on the cover of this issue in 1968, and several Loengard photographs include the Chows. On the right, you can see the first spread from the original magazine, the beginning of the article. It includes a photo of O'Keeffe walking with a Chow trailing behind. In this photo by Todd Webb, you see O'Keeffe brushing a dog that's lying stretched out on a table so it can be easily reached. With dogs around, part of O'Keeffe's daily life naturally involved caring for them. She enjoyed, to some extent, the brushing and grooming. Early on, at least, she writes to Richard Pritzloff, "As I hunt for the burrs in their fur after I've had them out over the hill, I have to laugh, thinking how you would think me foolish. They stand so patiently while I do it and try to lick my hand as if they appreciate it." On another day, she writes, "You must come over and see the dogs. They have never been prettier." Maybe this was after a grooming session. This is another Loengard photo, a picture of a bedroom at Ghost Ranch. You can see a Chow lying on the bed up against the wall on the right-hand side of the photo, a fuzzy black shape. I think it's fun to see how well they fit in O'Keeffe's homes and sometimes even in the landscape. So it can take a second look to notice they're there at times. O'Keeffe did allow her dogs to sleep in her room sometimes. To her sister Anita, she describes her bedtime routine with one of her dogs like so. "My dog was very glad to see me. He carried on as if he just could not be petted enough. But when it is time to go to bed, he turns his back on me as if he does not hear me speak. He doesn't want to come in, wants to stay out in the cold. I get up in the night and let him in usually. He fixes himself on a big cushion by the window that he seems to think is his. But when I wake up in the morning, he is always on the floor where it's cooler." Traveling was one thing that O'Keeffe couldn't easily do with her dogs. And she frequently expresses regret at having to leave the dogs to the point of it almost preventing her from taking trips. This note, written to her sister Claudia, gives some insight into her feelings on being away from the dogs on a work trip. "I have thought often of the dogs, wondered if they slept in your room or if they bothered you and were put out. I have gotten so that I like having them in the room at night, even if it sometimes is a little trouble. I probably miss them more than any other part of the house." Having spent a lot of time with O'Keeffe's personal library, I often find that the subjects she cared most about are heavily represented in her collections of printed materials. Here you see some more ephemeral materials on dogs that come out of our archive. You can see a small pamphlet called Here's What You Should Know About Me, with a picture of a dog talking to a human. You can see dogs, their care and feeding, the control and prevention of rabies, a book list from Dogdom, which was a monthly magazine for dog breeders and enthusiasts. O'Keeffe was a lifelong learner and collected, studied, referenced, printed materials on subjects she was interested in her whole life. This Chow reference book, the Chow, for the novice breeder and exhibitor, is one of the rare books in O'Keeffe's collection that she kept two copies of, with one copy at the Abiquiu House and the other at Ghost Ranch. You can see both copies are quite worn. This book of dog-related advice, How to Raise a Dog in the City and in the Suburbs, was published in 1950 and illustrated with humor by James Thurber. Sticking out of the book at the top, you can see that small paper flag that says the word ephemera. This indicates to us that a piece of ephemera was found tucked inside that book at that location. Sometimes the things O'Keeffe tucked inside appear to have been just the nearest thing at hand that she's using to mark a page, and in other cases, they seem to have been added to a particular book with more intention. And you see here on the right an informational pamphlet on the Acme silent dog whistle, and we do know that O'Keeffe used a whistle like this one at least at one point. In addition to studying her dogs, O'Keeffe kept records on them, like most responsible pet owners often do. It's often from these records that we can determine the basic information like birth dates and names. Unfortunately, a complete set of records doesn't seem to have been kept for all dogs. So these are pet papers related to Jingo from one of our archival collections. When you first open this this folder, you see this folder labeled pet papers, immunization record, and valuable documents folder. And when you open it, you see the yellow color it probably once was all over. And that small rectangular card-shaped document is a certificate of vaccination for Jingo, the cinnamon female Chow. Just behind the certificate is a folded piece of white paper with some handwritten notes on it. And if we unfold that, we find Jingo's certified pedigree, and so on. This is just a little window into what it's like moving through O'Keeffe's papers and records as a researcher visiting our library and archive. This last part of my talk gets a little sad, so this is a trigger warning. If the loss of a pet makes you feel too sad, you are genuinely welcome to tune out for the next few minutes. I'm going to read this full letter where O'Keeffe expresses great sadness over the loss of what might have been her favorite dog, her first dog, Bo, because she describes so well what it is she loved about him, and because it so clearly demonstrates how much she cared. So she writes to her sister Anita, "Thanks for the package. I'm long in writing that it came, but I have been terribly upset. You know I have had two very fine Chow dogs, but now I only have one. The most beautiful one was hurt by a truck or something. He would never have had the use of his hind legs again, so I had to put him to sleep. He was the lively, handsome male, dark Maltese color, dark bluish gray, with an almost white plume of a tail around up over his back. He was the top dog of the town for fighting, and I always knew he couldn't survive too long. He lived too dangerously. He was very dignified, interested in everything, always on the front seat of the car looking out the front window, First thing to greet me in the morning, always a dark spot lying asleep outside in the night. A terrible deep bark. Um, if anything came near, and when he barked, I always got up and went out. Climbed all the high places I couldn't quite get to, and he was very fond of me. Well, he is gone, and it is very sad and lonely because he was part of everything in my life here. He was a real dog. The little female is a pet. That is the difference. She isn't as beautiful or as lively, is just a little old woman, though she is very pretty. I always knew it would be this way, and now it is. I had him 3.5 years. He was 4 years old. Don't ever ask me about it. I just can't talk about it. G. In Todd Webb's book, Looking Back, that I mentioned earlier, and that is pictured here, he confirms this story because he happened to be visiting O'Keeffe at that time. Um, and he also tells of what happened afterward when they took Bo to the White Place to bury him under a cedar bush. Many, many years later, when O'Keeffe was 93 years old, she remembered this story and wrote a very long letter to Todd, thanking him for his help that day. She writes, "You were there. We talked a little and decided to put him to sleep and call it his end. He had had a good life. He looked so beautiful as he sat there with us. When I think of it now, I even get an odd feeling in my stomach." And she's 93 years old when she's writing this. He was given a shot and lay quietly down. He was put in the back of the car. It was all that a man could do to lift him. We drove out into the White Hills, dug a hole under a small-sized cedar bush, and put my beautiful dog into it and covered him with earth and many rocks. I like to think that probably he goes running and leaping through the White Hills alone in the night. I just think that's such a sweet representation of how much she liked and appreciated Todd and how much she loved her dogs. Um, she was remembering that story and his kindness to her dogs, her best friends. Um, and it was so impactful that she needed to write to him to remind him and to thank him one more time. So that kind of concludes my presentation. Here is pictured the library, which is the space where I work along with the rest of our team that includes Chloe Walker, our archivist that we're excited to have. Um, I want everyone to know that you're welcome to request an appointment. I provided that link there that will take you directly to our appointment request form. You're also welcome to be in contact with the library and archive directly. I've listed our general email address here, my phone number at work, and my email address here. And we're also happy to provide a certain amount of remote assistance too if you're unable to visit us in person. So yes, that is it, Molly.
Great. Thank you so much, Bonnie. It was so great to learn more about O'Keeffe and her pets over the course of her life. And I think, one, I want to thank you also for sort of doing a bit of a case study. This is what it would be like for folks who do want to visit the research center and say you have a topic that you want to dive into, for instance, dogs. And these are the kinds of materials that would be pulled for you to peruse and read and research. And I really appreciate how you were able to weave together this story. But also, it's just so wonderful to see so many images of O'Keeffe sort of in her natural state. We are so often shown and seeing images of O'Keeffe with her very carefully crafted public image. And if there's anything that really brings life and humanity to a person, it's seeing them engaging with their beloved pets and treasured parts of their family. So thank you so much for doing that for us.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was fun to work through images myself and kind of discover for myself images that I didn't know were out there.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are interested, even from home and sort of perusing, I've fallen down this rabbit hole before, and we now have an incredible resource called Access O'Keeffe, where you visit our website, you will be linked to it there, where you can view all, essentially digitized versions of all kinds of things from the art collection, but also from the archive. And if you type in the search term dogs or Bo or Chia, you'll get to see some really lovely pictures like the one you have here. They're so precious, just peeking in. So definitely encourage you to do that. But also, again, for any key term or topic that's of interest to you, there's so many resources available so you can kind of craft your own story from these materials. We have
Absolutely. Access O'Keeffe is great. And I will note, kind of related to my pointing out how we treat some of our photograph collection and keep it with like categorized as art and others in the archive. That's relevant to using Access O'Keeffe. So just keep that in mind as you're trying to search around in there. Don't miss out on either half of the collection of photographs.
That's great to know, and it's so exciting too to have all this content sort of woven together where you can read the letters and see the paintings or sketches or images and really have that holistic experience in researching O'Keeffe. And you're so wonderful to work with. So highly encourage anyone and Chloe as well to make an appointment or give a call and do your own research project. But we do have a few questions in the chat that I want to make sure we get to. We've had a couple folks have heard, perhaps, is it true? And maybe you can confirm or deny. If is it true that O'Keeffe collected fur from her chows and that fur has been commissioned into creating like scarves or other types of apparel? Is that a thing?
Yeah, well, that story is related by Mary Ligon in her memoir. So you could find her book and read about it in there. And that is how she remembers it, that O'Keeffe had the fur collected and then sent off to make, I think it's shawls specifically. And and I hope I'm not misremembering her own story. So please refer to the book for the most accurate version. But I believe Mary says she wasn't around for like the making of it, but that she did herself see the shawls and touch them and said they were very soft.
They must have been so soft.
Yeah,
Just looking at they look so soft. I want to pet them.
I know.
Um, we also have Tom joins us and says, "Thank you, Bonnie. Given O'Keeffe's dislike of rattlesnakes, which are definitely present in the Ghost Ranch and Abiquiu area, do you know of any interactions between the dogs, maybe scaring off being guard dogs against rattlesnakes too?"
Um, no, I'm not aware of them like protecting her from snakes and I don't actually think she um thought of them that way. It may have been the opposite, that she was more scared for them.
Mm.
There, I know were some rattlesnake scares where she had dogs taken to the vet who were limping, or at least one dog. Um, because she was worried that it was something more than like a sprained ankle, if dogs have ankles. Um, and I believe there was at least one rattlesnake bite. I think I came across a letter where she's writing about a dog recovering from a bite. She is well known for walking around with her walking stick and kind of pounding the ground to try to alert snakes to her presence and encourage them to stay away. And I think in part she did that for herself, of course, but also likely for her dogs as well. That was something that I noted about her putting in white carpet in her studio space. That seemed to be primarily for the benefit of the dogs. She was concerned about tripping on them and hurting them. She was much less concerned about falling herself.
That's so sweet.
Yeah.
Let's see. I want to give a shout out to Jason Garcia is joining us. He is co-curator of the exhibition Tewa Nange Tewa Country, which is on exhibit at the museum until November, co-curated with Bess Murphy. And he says, "Thank you, Bonnie and Research Center staff. This is a great presentation on how a research project can be undertaken. And an extra thank you for your help while researching information for Tewa Nange Tewa Country." For those of you who have visited the exhibition, Jason has an ongoing piece where he's continually adding images of Ping or Pedernal, which was famously painted by O'Keeffe. But Jason is painting it many, many times over the course of the exhibition and adding those iterations to the gallery space. So every time you visit, you're likely to see another version of that work. So keep visiting. And thanks, Jason, for joining us. It's great to see you virtually.
Hi,
Um,
Jason.
we have a question from Joan who asks if there's any photo prints of the dogs available in the gift shop, which is a great question. We'll have to inquire about that with our retail folks because I would love a print. Um, but I will
I'm not immediately aware of any. I don't think that I've seen that, but our store is so full of good things. Every time I'm in there, I'm discovering something that I didn't know was there, and that's actually really cool. So that's a great idea, if
yes,
it's not
well,
there already.
noted. And I will shout out another quick shout out. Bo and Chia, or at least an iteration of one of the many Bo's and Chias, through a collaboration with Grace Almanza, who manages youth and family programs here at the museum, and Chrissy Breeze, who's a graphic designer, have created basically what are mascots of Bo and Chia for youth and family programming. And so if you visit the museum, you will see this sort of graphic version of Bo and Chia, leading young folks to sort of explore things in the museum and take part in activities. We do have a little stuffy version. So
So
we
cute.
truly do love they show up in many places.
Maybe it's kind of Chow's as O'Keeffe viewed them as her, good, soft, cuddly friends.
Oh, we do see, oh, Cheryl. It's always good to see you, Cheryl, as well. There are cards in the store with some version of the Chows there, so definitely pay us a visit and check those out. We have a comment from Tim. He says, "Thank you for the wonderful presentation." And one of my favorite photos of Georgia is her in the sun with a Siamese cat on her shoulder, which I think was the one you said maybe when she was camping in Ghost Ranch.
Hmm.
Perhaps. That is such a charming picture. And we have another, comment about the cats that it seemed that maybe her pet cats were a little less formally considered pets in comparison
Yes.
to the.
That's my impression. Again, in my job as librarian, it's primarily um, my job to connect other people with resources, and I don't always have a lot of time to pursue like researching my own interests. Yeah, it's really not a part of my job here. So, with more time, I would probably be able to answer more confidently. But my impression is that yes, she is less frequently referring to cats by name. Um, but she also just is very fond of them. You can tell that she really enjoys the right cat, especially a cat with personality. I know in one instance she's writing to her husband, Alfred Stieglitz from New Mexico, and telling him she's petting her mean cat, who is really truly very mean, and that you have to care for cats um, in the same way that you do humans.
As someone who's had cats always, they
Mm.
certainly do. I can definitely see a mean cat being the mean cat. I think we had like 15 gray cats over the course of like our childhood. Not unlike Bo and Chia, which is like, oh, this is now gray. This is the gray cat that we have, and still treasured parts of the family, but in
Yeah.
different ways.
Hmm.
A couple folks are curious if you have any thoughts on why O'Keeffe never painted the dogs. I know that you did mention, people and animals and, those are very rarely, if ever, the subjects of O'Keeffe's formal paintings. But have you discovered any other material that might shed some light on that?
Yeah, I think that I would have to say that I really haven't. In general, I think O'Keeffe was pretty private about her artistic practice in general. She didn't like to be watched while she was working, and I find her to very rarely discuss things she's working on in detail. Um, she talks a bit about them to Stieglitz, but it's pretty limited. Um, so no, I don't necessarily have in mind a source that speaks to like why she kind of stayed away from portraying figures in her work, whether they're her beloved pets or people that she was close to. You know, early on, she's kind of painting abstracted impressions of people, but yeah. So maybe the dogs are covertly in an abstracted work. You never
Very
know.
possible. And I really loved your explanation and your sort of conclusion that in her own photographs, they they are very much part of the composition as like shadowy, fluffy spaces and forms, which
Yeah.
as she explored photography later in life, it's really, really interesting. I don't think I've ever seen too many images where the dogs are just sort of like part of the composition. And so that was really, really cool to see.
Yes, I think that's really fun to see her playing with that in that way. And it's like confirmed in how many times she photographs the same thing. She's very like iterative in that way. So she photographs the same ladder, just playing with angles and framing and light and whatnot.
So you mentioned too that just the nature of your work, you're not always able to dig into something, like this that isn't on behalf of maybe another researcher or other folks who are trying to find information. So over the course of your digging into the dogs, is there anything like a particular picture or anecdote that really struck you as exciting or touching or something that really stood out?
You know, I think I probably alluded to it, but I think the passing of her first dog and how that lingered with her. She actually um, writes to Todd Webb twice about that. The year prior to the letter that I read, she writes a note in a card. Um, at that point, she's dictating her messages to people, but it's there nonetheless in someone else's handwriting. Um, and it's just so sweet to me and like poignant, I guess, that this is coming to mind for her later in life. And that it was so meaningful to her what Todd did for her in that moment that she really feels that she needs him to know about it. I don't know if maybe she didn't get a response from her first attempt at telling him how important that was to her. So she had to try again. But I just thought that was very special. And for anyone who's lost a dog or a special pet before, it can be such a monumental um, sadness in one's life. And so it's interesting to see that that was true for her too. It's one of my joys in my work, kind of to see how many different um, roads into our library and archive collections, like uh, roads into O'Keeffe adjacent research. There are, like having the chance to spend time with Jason on his doing research related to his art practice is vastly different from supporting someone who's like a nuclear scientist who's researching O'Keeffe's connections to Los Alamos, which is very different from someone writing an O'Keeffe biography. The list goes on. So, yeah, I think her pets are also another. road in. You may not know about or care about or enjoy O'Keeffe, but her relationship to her dogs is special and unique and interesting.
So true. And that portion of your presentation, it brought tears to my eyes. It was so to use your word poignant, it really was. And I think in addition to being, relatable for so many, when something like that happens, but also to remember, despite the many years that pass, her her choice and her decision to really write and intentionally set down how much that kindness meant to her. And I think that that can apply to anything, for any person at any time, that if there's something that's happened and someone's shown you like kindness and generosity, and it still lingers in your mind as important, even if you're 92, I hope you have a chance to write it down and share, because I'm sure that was really important to hear as well during that
Yeah,
important time.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so we have a couple more comments, just folks, saying thank you, Bonnie, for sharing. These are such a great insight, such great photos. Cheryl here, who is joining us, a volunteer with the museum, is reminding us that first Friday, which is first Friday of every month, we have free extended admission to the museum, and that I believe in keeping with the theme of dogs, that there are going to be free hot dogs. So for
Yes.
details, visit our website. But again, there will be some information about some adoption events that are being held in collaboration with Espanola Humane Society. So definitely visit our website for the full roster, of those things. And we have time for just a couple more questions. I'll share one from Ryan, who asks, if over the course of your research, did you come across any explanations or any specific reasons why she chose the names that she chose and sort of stuck with those names?
Um, no, I don't know any meaningful reason. If anyone listening does, please share. I think research is a collaborative, iterative practice a lot of the time, but I am not aware of any of her sharing the significance of those names. I will say that seeing the records of like the her dog's pedigrees or the list of dog names in the shows she attended, the names O'Keeffe chose aren't out of the ordinary in that context. So I don't know, maybe she was aware of how people named their chows and took inspiration from that. But unfortunately, I'm not sure. I don't have a definite answer.
We'll just have to wonder.
Yes.
But they really stuck, seeing as how there's Bo and Bobo.
No.
Yeah, so funny.
It's very
Uh,
funny.
So I think the very last thing I'd love to wrap up with is, over the course of your slideshow, what is your favorite picture that you included?
Um, that's a great question. I'm just gonna fly through some of these. I love that one of her just sitting and caring for them. I love her brushing them. But I think it may be my very first picture here by Todd. Um, both she and the dog are smiling, which you pointed out, Molly, just a bit before we started this morning. And yeah, I just love that she's kind of caught between expressions. It feels so natural and like she's so comfortable, and at home with her dog.
Yeah, it's true. It's a very tender moment. I love this photo. And as we were chatting before, we officially got started, it's so nice to see an image of O'Keeffe sort of in her natural element, that's not such a perfectly poised, public facing Lifetime magazine cover, for
Yes,
instance.
absolutely.
Yeah, but also the title that you chose for your talk, and the quote, from the letter that you wrote about just the friendship, and that's so evident in this photo. It's so very sweet.
Yeah, it is. They're friends sitting there together. Pretty sweet.
Thank you so much. We're right at 10, so before we close out, is there any other comments or thoughts you want to leave us with today before we wrap up?
No, other than you're welcome to visit the Michael S. Engel Family Foundation Library and Archive in the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum Research Center anytime for any reason. Your interest may be purely in Chow's and not O'Keeffe. I would be happy to invite you into our space and share our collections with you. So just know all are welcome.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. And yes, a reminder to everyone that the Library and Research Center is just a wonderful resource. There's also always an exhibition in there that showcases some pieces of the archive that are not typically seen. Right now, there's some really lovely, lovely drawings by O'Keeffe.
Yes.
So don't forget about the Research Center. And if you have any questions about making an appointment or doing any sort of virtual research, please let us know. But in the meantime, we thank you so much for your time, for joining us. Thank you, Bonnie, for all of your research. We were really excited to see what you dug up for the talk. So thank you again.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you, everyone.
Hey, have a great day, and hopefully we will see you at the next event next month. But until then, take care and have a lovely day.